By 2030, passenger traffic will exceed 80,000 billion passenger kilometers, a rise of 50%, and freight volume will increase by 70% globally. Clearly, one of the toughest challenges is to manage the mobility of people and goods. As we imagine the future of sustainable mobility, the challenges with which the world is grappling are the complex issues of uneven penetration of mobility, congestion, safety, greenhouse gas emission in full cycle economics, affordability, and preserving and recycling resources as a way forward for sustainable mobility. As a recourse to these challenges, technology, innovation, and collaborations are seen as saviors. At the process level transformation, automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence are pivotal for green and smart manufacturing setups. In terms of product, new structural design with lightweight material and solution like micromobility, hyperloop, air taxis, electrification of powertrain, and multimodal and shared mobility are seen futuristic. Efficient use of alternate fuel and the fuel per se, and new energy vehicles powered by mechatronics, lidars, and sensors and connectivities are seen as the drivers of a smart and future mobility, while resolving socioeconomic issues of migration, increasing gulf between have and have-nots, providing equal economic and business opportunity across geographies. These are some of the important and pertinent issues that will drive the future of sustainable mobility. In this session on future of sustainable mobility, think tanks and experts will delve into identifying the right measures and path to achieve zero emission and sustainable mobility. Let me introduce the industry leaders and experts for this session. Mr. Vikram Kirloskar, Chairman and Managing Director, Kirloskar Systems Limited, and Vice Chairman, Toyota Kirloskar Motors. We are also joined by Mrs. Jay Anger, Chief Technology Officer, CNH Industrial. Jay joins us from Chicago. Thank you so much, Mr. Kirloskar and Mrs. Anger, for joining ET Global Town Hall. Let me begin by posing the first question that comes from recent statement by UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. He said that it is very imperative and important that the developed nation do away with all the vehicles which are run on fossil fuel by 2035 and by 2040 for the developing nations. How do you see this announcement, and do you think this will really create the required emergency when we move towards zero emission vehicles? I'll start with you, Mr. Kirloskar.
Well, certainly that's a noble statement, achieving this kind of a goal. But I look at the whole scene a little more holistically. If we have to reduce the situation of climate change, you see the rains we're experiencing right now in Bangalore, in Kerala, and all over the country. And I think around the world, all these issues are going on. I think one has to look at this in two holistic manners. For me, the primary one is a behavior change in people. How do we change our behavior to use less energy overall? And that, whether it's in mobility, which means more public transport, using a bicycle, or whatever, or change, new technology will keep on changing, which will get more and more efficient. And the second is overall efficient use of energy. What do we need to do to change the use of energy so that our efficiency, our output per energy unit keeps increasing rapidly? These are two big issues. And I think if you look at these two holistically and do a behavior change to accommodate requirements of reduced energy, then we'll start getting to a position where the technology will support us to achieve a lower emission in the world and work towards climate change, stopping climate change. And I can go into details now, I can break it down, but I'd like to really start at that end and say these things are possible, but look at it at a global and a holistic level.
Your thoughts, Jay?
No, I completely agree with Mr. Kirloskar's comments. To me, it starts off with what problem are we trying to solve? It is a very connected ecosystem. You just cannot look at, let me just make all electric vehicles and then it'll make a big impact on the environment. We have to look at how the energy is generated, and to Mr. Kirloskar's point, how is it being used? The carbon footprint of people, how they look at how they live, and as a and then you, as producers of vehicles, which is C Energy is one of, how do we make the technology affordable? How do we make it sustainable? So it is a complex, can I say, ecosystem of connected things. And ultimately, it cannot inconvenience the customer. If the customer is inconvenienced in some way, it's very difficult for technology propagation, to take place. So while we understand the technical benefits of what we're doing, we have to make it customer-centric as we think of the technology propagation. So it is the full ecosystem. And it's a very noble goal to have. Sometimes goals like this, even if we don't get all the way there, it goes a long way towards achieving it. So I'm a big proponent of having ambitious statements, but it has to be grounded with practicality.
You both agree unanimously that yes, these kind of goals are noble and important, but you also pointed out that practicality of those goals are important. You also pointed out that we should not focus on tailpipe or product side of the emission, but overall carbon footprint, that we talk about full cycle economics. Having said that, just the first part of the ecosystem, that is the supply chain, you might work on your internal process of manufacturing an entire setup to be clean or green. How are you guys? You are big giants working in automobile and different areas where manufacturing plays a role, and that's also cause of emission. So I just want to understand, how are you trying to control that you enhance the green quotient among your supply chain providers? Who will go first? Mr. Kirloskar.
Okay. If you look at an automobile supply chain, from the raw material to a customer, you start off with some places where there are giant producers, raw material producers like steel producers and aluminum producers and rubber producers and this kind of big things. Then there is discrete manufacturing in between, where the metal gets converted to a forging, it gets machined, it gets converted to an engine or a transmission, sheet metal gets pressed, becomes a car. All these parts come in through logistics, get assembled, go to a distributor, and then finally go to a customer. So that's generally, and then the customer finally disposes it off after a certain amount of time, and hopefully the vehicle gets back into the supply chain. Okay, that's how one starts looking at it. When you break up the supply chain, there are things, especially on the raw material side, which requires help, I think, on public policy, something like steel or the power being used thereof. I think there's a lot of government help that is going to be required in that area. If you're going to change over to hydrogen-based steel plants or hydrogen-based fertilizer plants, and there are many different technological possibilities on how to do that. Same thing on power, whether it's nuclear power, solar power, whatever that works that side, that requires a certain amount of government work. When you look at the in-between part, where we look at discrete manufacturing, component, car, and our dealership, there's a lot of work that we can do ourselves, and we can reduce our carbon output. We as a company, Toyota has taken a goal of zero carbon throughout the entire cycle. They've said 2050, in the entire cycle, we should be at zero carbon. And what we have done in India, 2 or 3 areas we have looked at. One is in our manufacturing, and second is in the product. They are the 2 basic kind of areas. And we've looked at carbon and water. So we worked extensively on green power. In our factory, more than 95% of our power is based on renewables. We're running a car factory on that. We are running water. We are recycling all our water. Rainwater harvesting, we're hardly, I think, using 5% outside water. Same thing, we have worked with our suppliers. We worked with our dealers. Our dealers use eco-wash, 99% less reduction in water. So some of this can be done ourselves. And some of it is required with government help. That's on the manufacturing side. The second is the product, and product is more complex. It's a big technology change. We are hoping in the next 2 or 3 years, at least most of our product line will reduce its carbon emission or carbon footprint also by almost 30–40%. And hopefully we'll keep on going that way. Normally we don't tell what products we're getting out, but we are working on that. But the main thing behind this, especially in the factory side, what we found was teaching people the effect of carbon on their lives. What is the future for their children if there's climate change and there's pollution? That has had the biggest effect. And we have used the traditional Toyota method of Kaizen, continuous improvement at every level, to achieve these kind of numbers. Our biggest issue on getting to carbon neutral in manufacturing is LPG or CNG, whatever we're using for heating in the paint shops. And I think in another year or two, we'll have a solution for that using solar and various other methods, sometime maybe direct solar also, and we'll sort that out. Then we'll get to carbon neutral in manufacturing at least. I'm pretty confident of that. But this is coming out of each one's individual contribution. How do I reduce my water wastage? How can I improve my work efficiency, energy efficiency? We use low energy automation using gravity as the main source of power. So it's that kind of thing. Eco-wash with the dealers, we're teaching the dealers, teaching the suppliers. You just have to get a mindset in, I want to change. Then a lot of changes happen.
So mindset becomes pivotal when we enter into a transition or transformation. And this time we are talking about transformation to a sustainable future mobility. Jay, would you like to add something in terms of supply chain side? How are you going to ensure that that side of the business is also strongly, with the green quotient, or they are trying to adopt to that?
No, I'm glad to. I think a part of we have our sustainability goals as a company, right? We have a chief sustainability officer. We actually publish sustainability report every year. As Mr. Kirloskar said, it's a combination of I call it our footprint and our handprint. Our footprint is what we do on our manufacturing plants in terms of, things like LED lighting, right? Things that we do to as much as possible to reduce the power consumption and water consumption. Anything to do with the carbon footprint reduction. That was one. And clearly use less if we can, change our processes to use less if we can. And then that also kind of brings into our suppliers. We do our sustainability extends to our sustainability goals extends to our suppliers. So we do monitor their footprint of their energy consumption, their water consumption, etc., and help share methodologies with them or how they can go about, economically viable way of reducing their footprint. And as well as things like logistics, transportation, how you transport something, recyclable, reusable containers, etc. And then we even go down to I think Mr. Kirloskar mentioned, things like steel, right? We talk about, there's the whole green steel initiative at the moment. Steel is one of the largest polluters in terms of generation of steel. Is a very complex thing with a lot of carbon impact. So we do go all the way into investing in technology ideas of our suppliers and our tier 1 suppliers with steel generators. In fact, I sit on the board of advisory board of a company called H2 Green Steel, a startup that's working on completely generating green steel. So we look at all aspects of it. And then what I use as a handprint is looking at our products, our solutions, and our customers, how they use them. What can we do to provide them the tools and methods so they can intelligently manage their own carbon footprint? as well. And I think Nabil is CNH, we are both in the on-highway and off-highway space in our products. A good example is on agricultural farms. Right now, there is a methane regulations coming in. The slurry pits generate a lot of methane. So what we're doing is coming up with technologies, I call it the circular economy, where our vehicles can actually run out of, I think Mr. Kirloskar mentioned LNG, CNG technologies, where we have vehicles that can support it so that they can generate methane in the farms and actually use it and kind of create a circular economy almost as a negative carbon footprint, not even a zero carbon footprint. So you got to think of the bigger picture, and sustainability is, and also things like in our supply chain, Nabil, conflict minerals, right? And we also look at where the strain comes from. A good example is, we talk about electrification, lithium-ion batteries, right? Cobalt is a really big issue at the moment. So are there technologies that can have, zero or no cobalt batteries, So we got to think short-term, medium-term, and long-term across the value chain.
You raised a very valid and pertinent point, Jay. You talked about the way we bring the raw materials. You talked about the steel, that the process of getting steel is itself a very, it's not environmental friendly. It doesn't really give you zero emission kind of scenario. We look at the lithium ion, mining of lithium ion or other raw materials. Just want to go back to you, Mr. Kirloskar, and understand, do you see, when we talk about future of sustainable mobility, what are the raw material you see being replaced, and what are the alternative that you see there, and how much of recyclability we need to bring in when we produce these automobiles that are vehicles or the mobility solution for the future?
See, I think each country needs its own solution. If you look like a country like Norway, which is almost all hydropower, pure electric vehicles is a fantastic choice, no question at all. If you can get the vehicles in, you have no emission in the power, and you have fantastic vehicles which work. And Norway is one of the biggest, as a percentage, buyers of electric vehicles. Even countries which have very high nuclear power and other power sources which don't supply, which don't emit carbon, I think it makes a difference. So if I look at India, India has one of the largest amount of solar power plants going on, increasing phenomenally. But the growth of India, the way it is growing, our coal-based power is going to continue almost at the same level. We are going to need to increase coal power or other power as well. And well into 2035, 2040 is what I'm told, is that the percentage of solar power is going to remain virtually the same, in spite, and I'm talking of generated, not installed. No? There's a big difference. Generated, it's going to remain about the same. So green sky or blue skies are for everyone. Green water is for everyone. It's not for pockets. We have to look at it. We can't say I will keep my city clean and keep the surrounding area dirty and burn coal out there. That's not. We have to get the whole thing look evenly. So what is the best solution for India? We have to worry about a solution which reduces our oil imports. The way you've talked about growth of vehicles in India, oil imports can explode. We have an issue of import of lithium. We don't have lithium in India, so we have to worry about recyclability of lithium, import of lithium. So there are a lot of challenges. Cobalt, of course, Jay talked about. It's a very serious issue. Many of these raw materials are serious issues. What we are doing as a company is we are looking at what would be the sort of best solution in this situation. We're looking at hybrids. Hybrids use 1/50th or 1/40th the battery size that you would use in a full electric vehicle. Makes a big difference. It doesn't require a charging infrastructure and significant reduction in carbon. We're looking at flex fuels, ethanol. India will go to 20% ethanol. They're asking about 100% ethanol. That combination is working in Brazil, giving the lowest carbon footprint compared to anything else. That's very, very interesting. So we have to look at various alternatives. I think a carbon-based tax, carbon taxation will make a big difference. You look at an air conditioner or a refrigerator, a higher technology air conditioner or refrigerator costs more. It's using a lot less energy. It's emitting a lot less carbon, but it costs more. And with the tax, it costs even more. So, when you look at carbon-based taxation, it can be across all products. And you will see the result of climate change. It started pouring. It's a thunderstorm outside. Sorry about the noise.
No, the climate varies. Here, it's almost like each city is very different in the US. Even in Chicago, some suburbs are it just varies. So much variability in the weather patterns these days. But,
So very nice point raised by Mr. Kirloskar. He says that 2-3 points he made very important. One, you should not look at the cleanliness or green quotient only in a concentrated area, but you cannot just go on spreading at other places and you say that one city the carbon emission has reduced. It has to be even. Number two, he says that the taxation based on carbon emission will play an important role. That's a valid point. But here I would also like to point out that you talked about lithium ion, cobalt. These two raw materials have a problem. You also talked about India, which is largely a country which gets power through a fossil fuel or coal, which is certainly not a carbon neutral. So that's a challenge. But at the same time, the industry, the scientists, the technocrats, the R&D guys are already working towards developing battery which are not lithium ion, but other like sodium or sulfur ion, all those kind of scenario. Looking at all this scenario, how do you see, Jay, on the global pedestal, just not India, how do you see the adoption of electrification? Do you think electrification is going to be an answer to sustainable mobility, as being pointed out in case of Norway? How many countries do you think will be able to really adopt in such a way?
No, I think that's a great question. And the point that Mr. Kirloskar made, it's going to be very regionally focused. What a solution for a given region, it depends on what the region can generate. Sweden is a good example, right? Sweden is a good example. It's a lot of wind power available, so they can generate a sustainable energy very easily in wind power. Globally, what I'm seeing is clearly solar. Even in the US, there is a tremendous amount of solar energy incentives for generation of solar energy, as well as use of solar energy across, whether it's homes or whether it's even businesses. So solar has become one of the, my view is these are all complementary technologies, Nabil. There is no panacea that says magically, here is the energy source that's going to make it all better. It's very much, it's going to be incremental. It's going to be, complementary technologies that come together. Sometimes you can combine technologies. Electrification and solar can be combined together in vehicles. So your question earlier is that I do see a significant amount of electrification in both in the on-highway and off-highway sector in the next 5 to 10 years. And clearly on-highways much ahead in terms of technology propagation. The reason I say that is if I just look at the cost of dollars per kilowatt hour of just the lithium batteries, where they've come from in the last 10 years, it's almost 1/10 of what it was 10 years ago in terms of normalized cost of these technologies. Second is the energy density, what you can package, energy density itself. Today's technology, you take a look at, let's say a 90 kilowatt hour battery pack. It's about 0.6 tons weight-wise and 600 liters or something in physical dimension. Whatever you can package today for 90 kilowatt hours, you can package 200 kilowatt hours in the next 5 years. So you're seeing a significant progress in just the energy density of battery technologies, and cost is coming down, right? This is one of the key enablers for. In parallel, as you mentioned, things that are very complex like lithium and cobalt and other raw materials, there's alternative solutions being worked on, whether it's national labs, universities, IITs are working on it. Completely getting rid of liquid electrolyte, going into solid state batteries. So there is a lot of work going on in the areas, and it's actually funded by the government, etc. The carbon tax, while I agree, I worry about it because there's no standard way to measure it. Sometimes it becomes a political issue more so than a technical issue to get at this. So it's a very complex thing to look at carbon incentives and cap and trade, etc. While I agree it's necessary because sometimes it kind of gives the push that it is needed for the technology. But it has to be grounded in the fact that there's no standardization clearly of how things are measured. And we've studied that for a while. I know US government is looking at it in terms of how to standardize it. But so it just becomes a complex issue. But I clearly see electrification significantly increasing in all sectors. I think it's doubled in certain vehicle sectors in India itself. So it's significant demand there.
Thank you, Jay. Mr. Kirloskar, I'll again come back to the same question. Just want to understand, as we travel to the transformed mobility world, how do you, can you give us a sense what combination of various kind of mobility solution that we see or that being talked about, be it Hyperloop, be it the multimodal mobility, micro mobility, because of the congestion and other various aspects of the mobility challenges that we are trying to resolve, air taxis, drone coming up strongly. You see the government of India has earmarked 120 crore rupees for drones specifically. So how do you see the globally, and which are the corners of the world going to adopt what kind of mobility solution? How does it look like?
I think a lot of countries are going on different stands. Japan is going on a stand of using hydrogen and on a hydrogen-based economy, how to slowly in the next 10, 15 years. They're doing it aggressively, but it's a long time period that it will take 10, 20 years or 30 years, go to a more hydrogen-based economy with using green hydrogen. Bulk of their green hydrogen is going to be imported as like oil. They're looking at getting hydrogen from Australia and places like that. Different countries are using different, I think, strategies on how to bring their overall energy consumption down based on their own geographical patterns. I think you find cities where bicycling is becoming more prevalent, especially in Europe. I know in Boston, where I studied, one of my fraternity friends and his wife, who were in the mobility space, Robin Chase was in the mobility space many years ago on, I think, sharing cars. She's convinced the whole town to put bicycle paths across all of Boston. You talk of micro mobility. But I think a high class or a top class public transport system is highly essential, which does connectivity right down to the last mile. And at each stage, the most efficient way of doing that is required. I'm not a big urban planner. I don't understand it. There are experts in it, and I think we must listen to the experts, people who have worked in utilities and in public transportation, and do the best we can do with it. This one great thing has happened during the COVID. We have reduced our travel so much, the use of technology, digital, virtual technology. And you've continued with all your programs without dragging us all to Delhi.
Yes.
Okay. And it has worked. It has worked very effectively. Our meetings have worked very effectively. So I think there are new things we are discovering that, yes, we can work without traveling. So that itself is a huge reduction in energy. Technology-wise, as a company, what are we doing? There are three basic things we think in our future of four-wheel mobility is three basic components we have is the motor, the battery, and the control. And these three are common, whether we have a pure electric car, a hybrid car, a plug-in hybrid, or a hydrogen vehicle. We are making cars for various markets in each of these formats, but these core components are common. And I'm focusing in India also on these three core components: manufacture in large volume. So based on what the customer wants, what is suitable for the Indian market, as the energy equation evolves, we would still be able to supply the customer what he wants and what will also reduce the carbon. So that's roughly the strategy.
Perfectly put. These are really important component, whether we move to whichever way of the mobility. One last question, and it's a very pertinent question. Just want to understand policies on a country level or nation level, and also policies by the international bodies like UN, WTO. How do you see their role, and how much do you think they have really worked in a way that could provide really sustainable future mobility, or we can achieve the carbon neutral scenario? We have heard the statement coming out from the UN Secretary General. Such statements, reports keep coming. But do you, as an industry person, do you really find something missing that you'd like to send out a message to these organizations that, yes, hello, these are the aspects we want you to work upon? If you could share with us. And any country or any government that you see has been doing some wonderful work in this direction, which are notable to you, if you could share. I'll start with you, Jay.
So these government agencies have a significant role to play when it comes to either technology deployment or adoption of something. I think it starts off with customer behaviors, right? Customer behaviors and engaging the end customer. There's a communication that's involved. They need to understand the use of technology. So there is an element of stakeholder engagement that I think these organizations can play. And UN SDG goals are really, it's a very nice framework. Most companies align with something like a UN SDG, creating a framework that everybody can align, the Paris Accord, etc., that helps. And then I think it has to be grounded with some practicality, right? There is still a lack of standardization of things, right? A good example, swappable batteries, battery recycling standards. So there's a standardization that can certainly, it's not just about creating a standard and saying, here it is. It has to be sort of validated with, with some amount of, I would say, public funds available for companies and universities to leverage and prove out the concepts and technology, right? And know that, we all live in what I call as Amazon world. There is data and there is data connectivity. And I'd say that because of COVID, we've learned how to work remotely. As I said, as we said before, the travel has been very different in companies than it was before. We're doing a lot of things remotely. And also we've learned how to do some things quickly. The whole vaccine development took place in unprecedented amount of time. It was thought to be impossible how quickly very effective vaccines were actually, I would say, invented. And by the way, those developments were happening 10 years ago. It just accelerated because of the urgency and the need there. So, and that happened because people came together. So the governments can play a role in establishing standards, being very practical about how the technology deployment can happen, and at the end of the day, stakeholder engagement. And it's all about data. We live in a data world, I talked about. So things like AI and other, having large amounts of data help us make very insightful decisions. So some way where the data exchange is possible, it is going to go a long way towards us as industries and as consumers, I would say, adopting some of these technologies.
Thank you, Jay. Over to you, Mr. Kirloskar. Your thoughts.
She has spoken, I think, very important points. And one of the points, of course, is data. But before I get to that, yeah, it is important for the world leaders to acknowledge that there is a climate issue, that there is a pollution issue. And they have to show leadership not only at the topmost level of the country, but I think all the way down the country, leadership has to show. show the way, at least acknowledge that there is a problem and we have to solve it. That's one. Second, I believe education of people to understand the issues of pollution, issues of energy use, energy efficiency is also very key, so that they can change their behavior. I've been going to the Nilgiris recently often, and it's become plastic free. You know, there's a collector there. A couple of people over the last few years have really taken it seriously. They check your cars for plastic bags and bottles as you go up, and it is making a difference. I think that's because it's growing so fast, and it's such a beautiful eco zone that all these things do matter. So I think it requires education of people and behavior change, like I said earlier. Third is what we are finding, especially in discrete manufacturing. I'm not talking of steel and the big plants, but definitely in our kind of manufacturing, reducing carbon is reducing our cost of manufacture. And it's making substantial reduction in cost. And so there's no issue of investing for reducing for reduction in carbon. There's a big case for that. It's self-generating, and I think if you work hard on that, whatever people can do to reduce their costs and use this also as a method is something that will work. And lastly, I feel the customer should be given a choice, and the way the customer can be given a choice is through carbon taxation. You know, you tax the high carbon items, the customer gets a choice. Technology keeps changing, science doesn't, and we have to focus that energy doesn't get created somewhere and comes out somewhere. So we have to be careful to keep the science and the politics separate, and that's what the leaders have to do. And go based on science, not on politics, on decisions like this. That is very critical. So let the customer choose, but focus on the science of it. Thank you.
So the science has to rule, technology may change, and politics should be staying away from when we talk about all these aspects. But you missed to comment on the role of pertinent organizations like UN, WTO, and WHO. How do you see their role? Do you think they are doing enough in this direction? If you
they have to educate people. You know, I think it's important that they disseminate information based on science and educate people, find ways to bring curriculum on environment, on circular economy in school textbooks. I think we have to start from there. And you have, we found when Mr. Modi started his outdoor defecation drive on toilets and all that. And what we really found, or we've been working a lot, and we've made our district around our factory. I started working first on our district, outdoor defecation free, was by actually teaching all the kids in schools, and they forced their parents to build toilets. And we've got our outdoor defecation. We said right from, and we have a large eco zone. We built a 24-acre eco zone where because of COVID, the thing got sorted out. We trained up to 5,000 school children. You can hear the thunder. But we trained up to 5,000 school children. And during COVID, we did another 8,000-10,000 through video conferencing, but physically at our eco zone on a circular economy. We have a full program on that. I think we have to keep teaching the people on this and get a behavior change out. It has to start at all levels, top level to bottom level.
Jay, your thought on these organizations?
No, completely agree on coming back to customer engagement. I really love the idea of going all the way to schools, educating children, understanding what the future is, and having a framework that can be customized for each country, each region. As we talked about, challenges are very different regionally, but having a broader framework people can align on and be very practical about it. You said science is the king, customer is the king, in my view. Customer is the king, and we all exist to serve customers at the end of the day. And we have to make it in a sustainable way. Companies have to be sustainable as well. It isn't just, if we don't survive, it doesn't really matter. So it has to be sustainable for us as well as companies. So looking at all of that, and as I said, standards, they can certainly help, create some global standards on certain things. And the way you do that is you bring the stakeholders together and work through that. And so those are the kind of things I'm sure the organizations can help facilitate. And then data in some forum where the data can be exchanged done in a safe way. Obviously, data is protected for individual regions, countries, people, etc. But doing it in some agnostic way that the broader data trends can be used for further insights. Is what I would say. So we live in a very interesting times right now. In some way, COVID has been horrible, but it's also taught us a lot of things of what we can do differently. We use the term the new norm in the company. We'll come up with some other norm we will reach coming out of COVID here. So
thank you, Jay and Mr. Kirloskar, for wonderful insight. Your words are really a great insight to the viewers, to the audience who have tuned in. Thank you so much once again for joining ET Global Town Hall.